Welcome to Hello You. Yes, you. The podcast that opens up the full spectrum of mental health like never before. We're not here to skim the surface. We go deep into every corner of the human experience. From international athletes to high-powered CEOs, everyday heroes to global change makers. Our guests bring raw, real, and radically different perspective on what mental health really means. This is your space, a place for truth, stories, and connection. Whether you're thriving, surviving, or somewhere in between, we're here to remind you you're not alone. So pull up a chair, take a breath, and let's talk about the stuff that matters. Welcome to the most open, honest, and inclusive mental health conversation in the world. I'm your host, Dan Darwin, and welcome to Hello You. Hello You would like to thank our title sponsors, the Loss Prevention Department at NACOA plc. And welcome to another episode of Hello You. And today my guest is Shak. Shak, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Shak, full name Shakila, for anyone who wants to know. I am 29 years old, single mum to a lovely 7-year-old, and essentially someone who has been through the wheels and motions of multiple things in life, who probably has wasted years being embarrassed of things that are pretty much things that lots of people go through. So, yeah.
Cool. Perfect guest for the show, because that's what this show's all about. It's about sharing those stories and about telling people who we are and inspiring some people and resonating with others and just having that general conversation around it. Okay, so let's go back. Let's start right at the beginning then. Who was Shak? What did Shak want to be when she was a little girl? When you were growing up, what were your ambitions? What was...
So from a very young age, I have always been what I would say was an extrovert. So always the loudest person in the room, the smiliest person in the room, and probably the energy of... I could walk in and change the energy of most rooms I walked into. I was a bit of a bookworm who grew up living with my mum and my older brother and my younger sister. All the way through junior school, I was obviously quite smart, quite sort of working my way through what other people would, well, what I look back at and what people used to refer to me as a boffin, for those who know what that word meant.
Yeah.
I then, through some issues with my mum and her ongoing addiction, ended up moving in with my dad in whilst age 11, where I have been then until I had my little boy at 21. I am in the process now of starting a very huge house renovation, which is quite quickly testing what little patience I had left. And yeah, pretty much I think that's sort of where I was and where I am now. Okay,
so what was your family life like? You mentioned your mum and the addiction stuff, and we're come through to that. What was the family life like growing up with your siblings? What was your general day-to-day? What was that like?
So, I mean, you know, it was your standard 2 younger sisters with an older brother. My brother was what we would refer to as the class clown, so he was always the one making everyone laugh, you know. He would regularly sort of wind me and my sisters up, just like any older brother does. Yeah. Similar with me and my sister, who would argue over pretty much anything and everything, whether that be who ate the last biscuit, who's wearing so-and-so socks, you know, all the things you can name it. We grew up in a estate in Weston, whereby we were sort of always out and playing, and sort of we got on, and although we would wind each other up behind the doors of the house, you know, with the close of lots of other children and things like that, you know, our older brother always had our back, still as he does to this day. And myself and my sister, you know, similar relationship to that, in that we can be horrible to each other, but then that extends in making sure that we looked out for each other outside. We grew a lot closer as issues with our mum sort of arose in our older age. But when we were young, we were quite a close-knit family, which was quite nice with our mum there as well.
Yeah. Siblings always have that way of pushing buttons. I've got siblings of my own, and they all know the spots, the weak bits. If they want a reaction, they know where to push, they know where to place. But obviously family tends to come back together most of the time. Some way or the other, it works its way out. So you're quite close, growing up in Southampton. I'm going to say right now, you're the first female guest that I've had on. This is 11 episodes in, the first
No
female
pressure.
guest. So, and we're talking. So that childhood, you're bonding with your siblings. Mum and dad not together at that point.
So my mum and dad split up when I was very young. I was very grateful for my dad's new partner. So, I mean, they're not together now, but I still refer to her as my stepmom because she was fundamental, you know, as a female. When you live with your dad and, you know, growing up and spending that time with your dad, there are some things that conversations you just don't want to have with a man. So she was really, really fundamental. And obviously as they were together, I then had, me and my siblings, had another 2 brothers, so 2 younger ones that share a different mum.
Okay.
So, yeah, I forgot what the question was now.
So the family life. So your mum and dad have split and gone their separate ways, and you stayed with mum at that point. And life good?
Yeah, life was fine. I'll be honest, my mum, she was brilliant. She was, you know, I look back at all the memories we had, and she'd be dancing in the kitchen to White Flag by Dido. She, you know, again, was quite always someone who could change the aura of a room. You know, people who knew her loved her. She was, you know, she had all of these baby nicknames for all 3 of us, and she treated us very much like babies right up until the end because, you know, and I get it from being a mum myself, your baby is always your baby, even when your baby has their own babies.
Yeah. So it's that circle of life, isn't it? And it's the unconditional love that comes with it. And I don't think until you become a parent, you don't feel that, you don't know.
No, I used to always think that she was so, like, over the top. Like, and I remember when I got with my son's father, and she was like, oh no, you know, I'm not sure I like him, all this, that and the other. And you used to always just think, oh, she's just jealous because I've found somebody else who loves me not more than she does, but that, you know, it's always that worry that she was a little bit too much because we were her children and we were all very close. And then when you put someone else in the mix that she didn't necessarily like it. So it is funny to sort of look back and sort of, I mean, my son's 7, so nowhere near that stage yet, but it's quite nice to see the whole, you know, that is, you know, and as he gets older, I still look at him as if he was that really small baby that was handed to me as soon as he was born, so.
Yeah. And I think being a parent myself is that I don't think anyone's ever good enough for your children. You just have to adapt and adjust and realise they've got to live their life because no one's ever going to be good enough because you've got such standards for them. And it's really difficult, isn't it, to let go of that. And I see that now with my own parents and how they treated me. So I'm sure you'll see the same thing, and you've got you've got all that to come as well. So when the issue started, you said you moved in with your dad around 11 years old?
Yeah, so my mum, I mean, don't get me wrong, she was an alcoholic. So she was, and anyone with addiction will tell you, they are people who genuinely in a past life should have been actors because there is nothing they cannot hide for quite a period of time. And obviously with addiction, you've got people that are functional addicts and then you've got people that are unfunctional. And quite often people can be functional for quite some time. My mum was a prime example whereby at that time, I had no idea what was going on in the background, nor did, you know, the likes of my dad or any other people that were around because she was so good at hiding what she was doing in a bid to, you know, protect the addiction as it comes, that there was so much that you didn't see until it got to a rock point. So for my mum, the breaking point with her was for this. She got a boyfriend who used to beat her up. So it wasn't until there was issues that arose with that, you know, it got to a point where in the end we were evicted. So it wasn't sort of a decision that anyone made for us to go and live with my dad, but it was something, you know, whereby we'd gone to stay with my auntie. Her and my auntie had an argument just like sisters do. Yeah. She'd stormed off in a strop. I was obviously dragged with her. We were walking to my nan's at sort of an ungodly hour of the morning. And at that point, my nan rang my dad and said, you need to come and get you need to come and get Shakila. And then from that day on, I've lived with my dad ever since. So, yeah, there was obviously quite clearly a breaking point where things had got a bit too much and things had got a bit out of hand and intervention needed to happen.
Yeah, and I think as a child of 11 years old and younger, we don't notice these things in adults, do we? We don't notice that. We don't understand addiction. We don't understand alcohol at all. I don't think some adults even understand alcohol still. But we don't understand that. So was there a long period of time, you look back on it now, where you could quite clearly see that addiction was there and she was just functioning and it was her coping strategy?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, again, it's the naivety of you don't know what you don't know. So I look back now as a fully grown adult who has been susceptible to things like drink and drugs. And, you know, I think one of my fonder memories was that I remember looking underneath her bedside cabinet and finding lots of like white powder in bags near cards, you know, at God knows what age I was, you know, 7 or 8.
Yeah.
I would have just assumed that was like salt or something, you know, or sherbet powder from a lollipop stick that someone's left behind, you know. It's only as you get older you put those pieces together, and how, you know, waking up and my mum's got, you know, her first drink of the day is a bottle of wine, or she's drinking from a box of wine because, you know, that's what she needs to get her through the day. But I, back then, again, didn't know what wine was, so wouldn't have understood that wasn't just like squash, which was what I was drinking. So it's the naivety of not being able to understand what those things were, which allowed for me to not see what may have been clear as day to me now at this age. Yeah.
And do you think the intervention was probably needed before it happened?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I am forever grateful for my dad, and, you know, my life could have been completely different if I had, for example, say I'd come from a family where my mum was just it. I was a single parent family, and I didn't have my dad. The likelihood is I would have ended up in care. And, you know, I stand here today proud of my story. Would I be proud if I'd gone through care? I don't know, because I don't know how I would have reacted to it. Because, you know, I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. But I think, again, like you said, it's hard to understand something that you've never been through. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm grateful for it. And, you know, it's made me who I am, so.
Yeah, and I think sliding door moments, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Whether there's parallel universes that if we take one turn into the right, we're a completely different path to where we are now. But I am with you. I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason, and the universe will only ever say yes to us. So if we're negative, it's going to give us negativity, and if it's positive, it gives us positivity because it can only say yes. And I think what you just said sums up the whole reason we do this, because some people will never understand what the likes of yourself have been through, and some of my other guests, and I include myself in that. People don't understand. So they listen to try and understand. They listen to the stories, and sometimes they can comprehend and it resonates a little bit, but unless you've truly lived it, sometimes it's really hard to comprehend what's going on in people's lives. And certainly as an 11-year-old, it's hard to work out. So when you've got to that point at 11 years old that you're suddenly living with your dad, that's a massive change for you. How did you feel about that? What happens then?
Yeah, I think for me it was that, you know, I'd gone from living in a completely different area. So, I mean, my mum lived in Weston in Southampton, and my dad lived in Southampton still, but in northern, the other side of the bridge. So I'd gone from living in a close where there was lots of children, I could go outdoors and play with whoever, wherever, to going and living in my dad's one-bedroom flat in the process of, you know, because overnight his life changed. He's gone from having no children that are with him all the time to, you know, 2 children that now need to live with him, and my stepmom, who was pregnant at the time of my eldest younger brother. So it was a huge change, and I think there was a lot that I was missing, and a lot of, you know, for as long as I knew, I lived with my mum, so it was always that every time I had a problem, it would go to my mum. Obviously, my dad was there, and I still saw my dad, but you know, at that age, phones weren't a thing either. So it wasn't even like it is now, where you can be one parent and text the other parent still every single day. We didn't have that back then. So obviously I saw my dad a lot and we spoke a lot, but the comparison and the shapeshift from my mum to my dad was completely different, especially because at home with my mum didn't work. So we were always together, apart from when I went to school. Whereas obviously when I lived with my dad would work shift patterns. So, you know, even the whole move to my dad's in itself wouldn't have been possible without my stepmom, who, bless her, went from being pregnant with a child that she didn't have to all of a sudden picking up 2 every single day from school. So, yeah, it was a huge change for all of us.
Sometimes I think step-parents are unsung heroes. It's hard to amalgamate a family because you've fallen in love with someone, and then suddenly you've got all these extra responsibilities that are thrust upon you because you've fallen in love with someone. And I do think sometimes they are unsung heroes. They do go unnoticed, but they do a lot, and they shape our lives when you've got a step-parent, whether that's a mum or a dad. So your life's been switched around, flipped overnight, really. How do you react? Does it change your schooling? Does anything change there? Is there any resentment held? Is there any anger? Is there anything there? What's bubbling away?
I think I was probably too young to feel anything. And I know that sounds like silly because I know children have emotions. But I think because I didn't really understand what was going on enough to actually have any feelings on it, it was that maybe I didn't understand fully what was going on, and there was obviously concern because I was then gone from being with my mum 24/7 to worrying where she was or to worrying how she was, and you know, not just for me, but I knew that we were like her life and soul. So not just us moving, I still moved and I lived with someone that still cared about me just as much as my mum did. Whereas she'd gone from, you know, her house, her 3 kids, to living with my auntie and her kids. So it must have been a constant reminder of what she had lost, which I think makes you feel guilty as such, because I was okay, because I was still in a safe place. I was still with people I knew. I just switched from parent to parent. I hadn't gone into, you know, comfort to complete discomfort.
I think that says for me a lot about your moral compass right there, because you're feeling guilty about leaving your mum to fend for herself when you're 11 years old. And at that point, most people, their focus is inward because they're 11 years old. So their consciousness is inward. Their awareness of everything else is inward. So to have that outward outlook and be saying, actually, I'm more worried about how mum's doing. So that just says a lot, I think, about you and where your centre point is. So what's the relationship like with mum at that point then? Are you having contact?
We still spoke, so we still went to see her. She was still a functional addict, shall we say. She was living with my auntie. So, and because it was close family, you know, we could go and see her whenever we wanted. You know, my dad would never have been like, oh God, no, you're not going there. So we could go and see her as much as we could. And, you know, my mum, again, brilliant actress. When we were there, you couldn't sense that anything was wrong. You know, I only felt guilt because I knew her enough. You know, I always say to this point, I was always a mummy's girl. I was always joining her hip. You know, I remember crying once because I couldn't see her in Primark and she had just moved about 5 centimetres away, but because I wasn't attached to her hip, I was crying thinking I was lost. So only because of that, I knew or was concerned that there was more to what she was actually showcasing.
And did she start getting any help at this point? Did any authorities get involved? Or I know we're living in a world now where obviously social services are very intrusive, and rightly so in certain cases, although we all read the horror stories that they miss, which it's that fine balance. It's a tough job. But back then, we're talking, you know, it wasn't as publicised. It wasn't as intrusive. It was more or less the parents get on with it. So what was going on at that point? Was there anything? No,
nothing at all, to be honest. And I guess it's because it's simply just gone from parent to parent. My mum knew that she wasn't in a position to offer what my dad could. So it was a bit like how if a dad decides that he no longer wants to be part of a child's life, or a mum decides no longer wants to be part of a child's life, you sign all your rights away and then that's it.
Yeah.
That's essentially what happened. So there was no need for social services because he didn't have to fight to get us.
Yeah.
She knew that she couldn't provide what he could. So she, as they say, if you love something, let it go, let us go, to ensure that we were, and again, she's done that because she loved us, because she knew that we would be better without her, per se.
Yeah, tough. And also, as you said earlier, they're good at masking. And sometimes they understand that if I don't do this, then I am going to be under the spotlight from a lot of people and I won't be able to mask everything here because they're going to ask some questions that I can't answer or I can't hide because they're trained to spot these things. They're not my children who I can hide stuff from and, sort of kid them into everything's fine. So sometimes I think that masking takes over and you think, well, actually, if I need to hide it, I need to move this situation so I'm in control still. Was she still functioning at that point?
Yeah, I mean, my mum was a fully functioning alcoholic right through. So up until probably 2 years before we almost lost her the first time, which was when I was in year 11. So what would that have been? 2013. So probably roughly between 2011 all the way through to 2013 was when she sort of really hit rock bottom.
Okay.
Obviously then we had 7 years of sobriety, which was hip hip hooray. And again, it was nice to see because after quite a while of sort of like watching my mum sort of not be the mum that I always knew that she wanted to be or could be, meant that we got her back for that period of time. So 7 years, and then sadly she went straight back to it and was essentially worse than what she was before.
So there's a number of questions that come into my head from that. Number one is that you've already said you're a bit of a boffin. So what would they call that now? Because boffin for me, I know exactly where you're going. Nerd, geek, I suppose.
Geek, yeah. I'm sure it's a mismatch of all of them. I'm pretty sure the youth of today have probably got even more words that don't make sense. But yeah.
So you're doing that. You're in year 11. So tough year. Talking GCSEs, we're talking... What they tell us is that this is the biggest exams you're ever going to face, and if we fail these, then our life may as well be over, or words to that effect. So you're doing that whilst you're then having issues with your mum potentially passing away because of the alcohol addiction. How do you cope with that? Did it hit you hard in your studies, or?
See, for me, I have always been a master of distraction, in that, if I have any form of concern mentally, shall we say, my goal has always been to keep myself as busy as possible to not have to think about it, which I know sounds like a really backhanded way of doing things, but I have to admit is probably one of the things that has kept me going over the years. So for me, being able to zone in on school and, by, 10 and 11, you're doing all the things that you want to do, essentially, other than, maths, science and all the stuff we've all got to do.
Yeah.
But, I had a passion for history back then, which is what I did my GCSE in. I had a passion for music back then. So there was a lot of stuff to keep me energised and focused. I had a great group of friends back then who were extremely supportive. And, one of my bestest friends growing up, her mum sort of was like a second mum to me.
Yeah.
One of those friendships where you could walk in and no one would bat an eyelid about the fact that you've just opened the door. Where you don't get offered a drink because they expect you to get up and make it yourself. Yeah. Because, your home is their home. So I had a lot of people around me that essentially acted like a support blanket or a piece of cotton wool. That meant that I didn't have to sit on my own and dwell, which is a massive help.
Yeah, thinking is not always the best thing. I like thoughts. Thoughts are okay. It's when we start thinking about those thoughts, it gets bad, doesn't it? Because we can fall down to that rabbit hole. So you've managed to find a coping strategy, which means you're just going to focus on this. Did you deal with the other stuff eventually, or does it avoid until it overflows, or?
No, so I tend to deal with things, but I like to deal with them in the moment and then not dwell, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because I think once you start dwelling, that's when you start with the what ifs, the buts, the hows, the oh God, have I missed, all these sorts of things, which I think sometimes can do more damage than it can save. Sounds really stupid, but for me, like you were talking about then, how about school is the most important time of your life. I always knew I wanted more than what I came from. Mm-hmm. What that was, probably couldn't tell you about then, but I knew that school was my answer. It was the one thing I was good at, and it was the one thing that nobody anywhere could take away from me.
Yeah.
So being able to use that as a focus not only got me through then, allowed me to remind myself that I'm doing this not just to get through this, but to get through anything else that comes my way in the future.
Yeah. It's that gateway out, isn't it? It's where it's going to take you to. That's your pathway. And I think sometimes we look at our parents and go, do you know what? I like those bits. I don't like these bits. And I've done that raising my kids and gone, do you know what? I like these bits. I'm going to take those. The other bits, I didn't like those, so I'm going to reinvent it. And I'm sure my kids are going to sit down one day and go, I liked what Dad did there, and I didn't like the other 95%, so I'm going to do it my way. And that's theirs. But we look at it and we do go, do you know what? Sometimes it does drive us on to go, I don't want to be that person. There's bits of them I love because they're my parents, but there's other bits where I'm like, that's not who I want to be. I don't want to be that. And we've got to find a ways to drive us forward. So school for you seemed to be that outlet, that gateway forward. So my other question on it then is, are you starting to see the signs in your mum now because you're getting to an age where you're more aware of alcohol, you're more aware of drugs?
So I think for me, I wasted, my mum started drinking, I was so young, I wouldn't even know what it was, through to where, the core parts of your life. So when she once it come to being 18 and things like that, I was always a bit dubious. So like for me, I've never ever done drugs. Not because I think I'm better than anyone else, not because I think I'm too good. I understand that, and I did this because I needed to understand why my mum chose drink over us. Not that it's a choice, which is what lots of people will believe you to say. And understanding her addiction and addiction as a whole, and, coming to understand that it is a disease and it isn't something people choose and it isn't something people want, and how two people could live the exact same life in terms of the lifestyle they have in terms of their drink and alcohol. One of them could go on and they'll be absolutely fine, and the other one, it could absolutely teetotal their life like it did my mum's. And I think it's that understanding which has shaped me now to understand that, okay, back then when I was younger and I thought, oh, well, she's just choosing to do it, it's because, she doesn't love us enough to stop. Whereas now I know that the real answer is that she couldn't stop because, it's an addiction, it's a disease, the support system around it, as in terms of like actual help that you can get, is shocking. My mum was a particularly messy one because she drank because her mental health was so bad. So she'd go to rehab, get detoxed. So she'd end up in hospital, get detoxed for a week. They would say, oh, here's a bag of pills for your mental health. Go and get it sorted. She then couldn't get into rehab or couldn't stick it out once past she got rehab because her mental health got bad and she went straight back to it. Yeah. But she couldn't get any help from mental health because she was, she was showing signs of substance abuse. So from their point of view, it's the argument of it's her fault, it's her choice.
Yeah, it's such a vicious cycle and this is the problem, which we pump a lot of money as a society into the drugs and alcohol rehab. And I've seen it when I was in the police and they do the offender stuff. They look at the offenders and they go, well, they're using crime to fund drugs and alcohol because they're addicted. Great, right? But at the core of that, there's a mental health issue that they're using the drugs and alcohol to cope with. So we put them into rehab, we spend all this money, much the same as your mum, we've spent a lot of public money to do the rehab, and then they've gone, but what about the mental health stuff? What are you going to do for me here? We're going to throw some pills at you, and that's just never going to solve a problem. And And then what do? They go, do you know what? Either the voices in my head or the thoughts I'm feeling, they're too much. And they go when I drink alcohol. So I'm going to go back to drinking alcohol because that's what sorts this part out. And at some point, we've got to look at this and go, how do we break this cycle? Why do we not put some funding actually into treating the mental health and not just the drugs and the drugs alcohol problem? And I think it's certainly when we look at it, it's because that's the bit that costs the money for society. They're looking at actually treating them in hospital for the drugs and the alcohol issues that arise. That's what we want to try and cut down. But we've got to look at the core for most of them. And it sounds the same for your mum, is that the mental health stuff was there. And she just needed a coping strategy. And alcohol and drugs was a good way of coping.
Yeah. And to be fair, readily available, because I don't think you could not find alcohol in any shop you walk into. So
yeah. If that was invented tomorrow, it's never going to be legalised.
No, and this is the thing. A lot of people will be like, oh, yeah, well, drugs are illegal, so why did they get hold of drugs? Okay, but, and I volunteer now for a charity which is called NACOA, so it's the National Association of Children of Alcoholics, but they support basically children and adults of children, children who are affected by their parents or a loved one's drinking or addiction. And the stats and things that so today about how alcohol causes more pain and deaths than any of the drugs that are around, and yet it is one of the easiest things to get hold of. Yeah, definitely is. Well, we tried to ban it once with prohibition and it never worked. So what hope have we got now? But it's easily available, and it is the most lethal substance that we have, and it's legal. There's no. I always get lost for words with it, and you're right. I think that people do believe it's a choice. And I think sometimes when it's you or I, and we say, do you know what, I'm not going to have a drink today, that is our choice. But people that are suffering with addiction, they don't have that choice because that's not how their brains are wired. It's not wired to the point where they go, oh yeah, I'm just not going to drink today. I just don't think there's enough education out there. And I mean, as a young age, when I grew up, I remember watching lots of programs about nits and how to watch out for nits. Was I ever going to look for my own nits at 8? Probably not. But there's not enough about things like alcohol and what happens. Because again, I am someone who has drunk. I do drink on social occasions. I have lots and lots of rules that I've put in place. But those are only rules that I've had to understand, to learn because of my mum. So again, and I say this all the time, as sad as I am that my mum is no longer here and the life that she went through, I am forever grateful because the sacrifices that she made in terms of her life and that she lived has allowed me to have the knowledge to be able to ensure that I don't make those same choices. Because, the reason I don't do drugs is because, in all honesty, I'm petrified that I would like it. And the only way to ensure you never become addicted to something, I can't get addicted to drugs because I've never done them. So, and as long as I maintain that, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm safe. In terms of drinking, I don't like the taste of alcohol. I do drink on social occasions, but I won't drink if I'm upset. I won't drink if I've got things going on. I won't drink on my own. I won't, go to the pub and have one. That to me is pointless. I think I'd rather have a lemonade and drive home. So that's something I have, and that's decisions I make every single day. But only because I've been, I don't want to say lucky enough because nothing I've been through is lucky, but only because I've had the resources and the experiences that I've had growing up that has allowed me to do that piece of work that isn't readily available. And I think if a lot more people were aware of the risks of alcohol and the risks of drinking and the risks of, how mental health can, affect, and the understanding that alcohol is in fact a depressant, people would think a lot different. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason why gin is called Mother's Ruin. It's because it is the most depressant substance out there. But you could have easily gone completely the other way, right? And gone, do you know what? I've seen this is how my mum dealt with things, so I'm going to go that path as well. Because if it worked for one, then could it work for me? So you've set boundaries and gone one way, but the sliding doors again, isn't it? It could have gone completely the other way, and you could have said, I'm going to try this then and see how that path goes.
Yeah, I think, you know, watching my mum go through recovery and seeing, and you know, and I say this for my mum was, you know, your typical addict. She would lie, she would steal, she would do anything that meant that she could get that box of wine at the end of the day and first thing in the morning. But when she was in recovery, she was a poster girl for it. You know, she was ranting about Jesus. She was saying about how, you know, this life that she lived now was loads better. And, you know, I think seeing that firsthand showed you that, you know, there isn't enough people out there singing the praises of what life is like on the other side. You know, addiction and things like that, it is quite a taboo subject. It is quite niche. People don't like talking about it. It's, you know, it's not embarrassing, but it feels like it should be. And it's all those sorts of things which I think keeps people in this cycle. For me, I knew what I was avoiding, which meant that I have gone the polar opposites. And, you know, I do carry an addictive personality. I know I am at risk because I've done the groundwork between it. But for me, the difference is that I am utilising my addiction in a completely different way. I would say I am an addict, but I am addicted to bettering myself, addicted to going to the gym, addicted to staying fit and healthy. And, you know, in grand respect, you know, me and my mum were both addicts, but I have made my addiction mean that I'm able to be here today to tell that story. Whereby, you know, she wasn't lucky enough to be able to understand what she was going through until it was far too late.
And I think it comes back down to education, because the education wasn't there. Alcohol, we've already said, readily available. And for a long time, certainly in the era of my parents, and would have been the same for yours, is that was their coping strategy. You were told that's how we cope. That's what we do. We don't talk about it. We don't find all the things that you just listed, that how you've channeled addiction. They're what we would call healthy coping strategies. Growing, learning about yourself, bettering yourself, having that ambition to move forward. They're what we would say nice and healthy coping strategies now. But we never had those. We didn't have the education in place. And do you think that addiction is taboo because people don't understand it, and because there's a lot of people divided by it that think it is a choice? Do you think that's what makes it taboo?
I think, you know, and again, it comes down to the whole, you can't understand something that you don't understand. I think there's you know, you've got the 50-50. People who are stressed and think that wine is something that they need after a day. And then you've got, you know, the other people who, it's understanding what makes you go for the drink, I think, which is the difference. You know, I have worked in pubs for a very long time over the years. And I think, you know, it starts by, I'm not expecting anyone to understand what I've been through or why I have these aversions to drinking drugs. But for people to listen, I think is half of the problem, because I think the problem is once people start talking, people start resonating. And once people start resonating, it makes people think differently. I know the youth of today are drinking a lot less than what the youth of, you know, I remember being 12 and everyone was drinking in a park, including me. You know, my youngest brother is 14 now, and that's not how he spends his time. He actually would much rather go fishing. So, you know, I think there is a shape shift from those children who, you know, grew up in pubs and then grew up to drink in pubs, as opposed to the children and stuff today that are drinking a lot less. But I think the shame around it and the understanding is, you know, even me, I used to think an addict was the person who was homeless in the shop corner. It's not. It's your mum, your dad, your sisters, your brothers, your aunties, uncles, grandparents. You know, there isn't a type of alcoholic or a type of addict. It is simply just someone who has an addiction and has, I don't want to say beaten by it, 'cause that sounds awful, but someone whereby that addiction has managed to take over.
And this is the problem, is that I think for you and I, we look at it and we go, so we can choose what we want to do each day. People who are addicted, that's not how they see it. And they reach for that as a coping strategy. And I think that's what divides people. I watched Matthew Perry do an interview, and this was on national TV, and he was explaining that it's a disease. And the guy who was the opposition they'd got on to conflict with him, he just could not understand it. And he said, no, you make that choice. You wake up every day and make that choice to be that. And I don't think that's right. And I think that's where the lack of understanding comes for it, which I think will always make it a taboo subject, because that people just don't understand that. And I think until you have been addicted, it is really hard to get your head around it. Until you've seen what it can do to someone's life, it's really hard to understand what these people are going through.
Yeah, I think it's easy to say, isn't it? Because that first drink is a choice. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, like I said, people are going in blind, because there isn't a test you can do to find out if you are someone who probably may be an addict or not. No. Because if it was, life would be a lot simpler, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot less people who wouldn't risk it. Because, it's the same argument in terms of, would you walk in front of a bus if you saw it coming? Probably not, because you'd probably get smashed by it.
Yep.
But that's nothing to say that two people stood in a pub who are having their first ever pint because they've just turned 18 or God knows what, doesn't mean that in 6 months' time that person then won't develop an addiction, because the addiction has always been there, because it forms part of your brain markup. So it's not something that you can point out. And I agree that first instance is a choice, but when everything in society tells you, oh yeah, go to the pub, have a drink, or when you're celebrating, have a drink, or when you go out with your mates, have a drink, I completely sense it, because there's lots of people who feel shame to order the non-alcoholic option, because people say, oh, why aren't you drinking? It's bizarre, because if you did anything else or you didn't want to do it, if you were climbing a mountain and you said, oh, I'm not going to do it, no one would say, oh, why aren't you doing it? They just think you aren't someone who doesn't want to climb mountains. It's not a question. It's just, oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
But if you...
And it is, you're right, because networking events, it's all done with alcohol. And those that aren't drinking alcohol, they almost get shunned in these networking events. And it's almost like, oh, I can't trust Dan because he's not having a drink with us. And we associate alcohol with all of that stuff. I think I saw the other day, Tom Holland has brought out a range of non-alcoholic drinks for that exact reason, because he's teetotal. And he said it's always awkward when you go out, because people go, oh, you're just drinking Coke or you're just drinking lemonade. So he said, now I have these non-alcoholic drinks that make me feel like I can be part of that social group, and I don't get that stigma around not drinking. But it's strange. We've done that as a society, haven't we? And it is still very much fundamental to us, although we have shifted a little bit more healthy to coffee shops. That seems to be the meeting place than pubs now, but whether it's healthy, I don't know, because it always comes with cake. But we are in that point where it has been a social thing. Certainly in this country, alcohol is a social thing. And you're right. Who knows how somebody's going to react to it? What changes happen in your life to suddenly go, how I felt after that first pint, I want that feeling again, because it blocks everything else out.
It's I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's like a video, it's like a cartoon, of like a duck, and basically this duck picks something off the floor, and then it jumps in the air, and then it falls down the air, and then it digs it again, and it jumps it, and basically as the jumps go forwards, it gets smaller and smaller, and basically it's just they come up and they come down. And I think it's really fundamental, because I think for a lot of people in addiction, what they are doing is chasing a feeling that was what led them to drink in the first place.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, it's with so much going on in people's lives these days, it's so hard to understand what bit it is, and if something's gone on, you wouldn't necessarily think alcohol is the problem, you'd think what happened was the problem.
Yeah. And we need to fight both battles. They're there. So I'm going to come back round, because it's obviously shaped your life massively. And you've gone through, saying, year 11, you've almost lost your mum, and then she's found sobriety. So something's obviously happened at that point for her to go, this is the time to stop. And then my other question, because this is going to be doubled here, so she's what is it that's changed in her? And then what part of that process, where you said before she was very preaching about it, saying she'd found Jesus, found God. Did that become her new coping strategies, or was it masking?
Yeah, so I mean, my mum was an addict through and through. I think what happened was, and she used to laugh about all the time, how she swapped alcohol for things like a certain flavour of crisps and a certain scent of shower gel. And, you'd go to a house and she'd have hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Because she was addicted to that thing. Because what she was doing is she was replacing that urge to have wine or to have, God knows what, with new and small addictions as she was going through. I think for her, it was being able to see the joy that she had when she could see her life for what it was again. So, she was always an extremely passionate person. And, as part of her recovery, she actually did do all of her qualifications to go and work in the rehab house. So she was, basically saying to people, this is what it's like. And, if you speak to anyone who's in active recovery, they will constantly just tell you how much better life is. And it's such a nice thing to see someone, not just love themselves again after years of watching them hate themselves, but for them to inspire, to showcase, what is on the other side if you're willing to take the risk. Because, with active addiction, there is a choice that has to be made. You have to choose to want to get out of it. One of the oldest sayings in the book is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. Yeah. And, my mum had done rehab a handful of times before it actually worked. And, she changed them because she wanted to. She wanted better. She wanted to stop picking up alcohol. So she took the help that was then made available. She did the groundwork. And I think a lot of rehab, when you go through them, their focus is around God and Jesus and, sort of the Bible and certain statements in the Bible, which helps people to sort of process their feelings. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, I'm not a religious person, so no. I couldn't tell you anything that she said, but we used to call her Bible Basher Lisa because that was what it was. But for me, watching her talk so happy and cheery about Jesus and, trying to put the Bible in anyone who would listen to her, although we were laughing and we were calling her Bible Basher Lisa, it was so nice to finally see her in her epitome of something that she loves. And I do think, with a passion in your life, there is so much more you can do if you stick to it. And hers was helping people, and recovery allowed her to go back to that, which was absolutely lovely to see. And I'm glad it lasted as long as it did. If I could have got a few more years, I would have loved it too. But 7 core years of my life, I had my mum back. And the mum I remember at 4 years old who, whenever my brother was trying to tell us off, she was clipping him around the ear, telling him to leave us alone. Which I think, when you've gone through quite a period of uncertainty, and, there was so many times when we thought, oh God, my mum's dead and she's not. And that I think has got to be the worst part, because you sort of get accustomed to, oh, she's going to go, and then she doesn't because she makes a comeback. And, even the time when she did die, well, not even the time before she died, they said to us, we don't know how she's alive. She's made it, which, probably helped span her through to Jesus because she thought he'd saved her. And she was told if she was to drink consecutively for 2 weeks, that would be it. And I think that was what spurred her on and what kept her going in recovery, because 2 weeks of drinking would take her away from the children. And I think her biggest fear in it all was to lose us completely. Not like lost us, because she did, lost us being with her 24/7, but I think there's a huge difference to losing us completely and, not being able to see us grow up. So
yeah, it's massive, isn't it? And it sounds like she found her hope, and all humans need hope. We need something like that in our life, whether that comes from faith, whether it comes from your own ambitions. We need that hope. It's what drives us forward as humans. If you ever take hope away, we will lose ourselves. But also, you're right, only self can fix self. And until you're ready to put that hard work in, you can talk to someone and pour your energy into their cup every day of the week, and the only person it's going to deplete is yourself.
No, 100%.
And until they're ready to take that step and help themselves, there's nothing you can do.
No.
And did you ever spend a lot of time beating yourself up about, could I have done more?
Yeah. More so when she died this time. So I think for me, my mum died in 2021 in February. She was obviously an addict for the 3 years before that. That was when obviously she'd picked up the bottle again after she was obviously out of her 7 years of sobriety. And I'll be honest, I just had, my son was very, very young, so I'd like completely like cut her out. Because, you know, as a parent, you know, I put my child first, and I didn't want him growing up seeing the same things that I did. You know, some of the things I've witnessed growing up, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, that I didn't want that for my son, because, you know, I've worked tirelessly to try and give him the life that I didn't have, that I sort of, not got fed up, I think, but I think, you know, when she was an addict the first time, I feel like there was a lot more sympathy because, you know, I hadn't known any different. But when she'd gone from and you know, she'd picked recovery every single day for 7 years. What changed? Why did she not? That, you know, from then on. And then for the next 3 years, I think for me, I went back to that argument of, you've chose to do it now because you've done it before. You know, I think like one of the last text messages I've got is, she sent me a horrible message, which she then retracted an hour later and said, I'm so sorry, I'm just a drunken idiot who's angry at the world. And I replied back with a photo of us from my prom, actually, saying, you know, you did it then and you can do it now. To which she obviously didn't reply. But it's, I feel like I've lost track of what the actual question was.
That's fine. In terms of that, though, do you still feel that now, that she didn't make that choice every day? She chose to drink again?
So, 50-50, and that's my honest answer.
Yeah.
Because when she picked up drinking again, it was just after either my brother or sister was ill, and I don't think she coped with it. I also think, you know, working at the rehab centre probably wasn't that great for her, because what had happened was, you know, with any form of illness, the relapse rate is obviously quite significantly high, and I think that quite quickly ate at her motivation after a while, because, you know, I think she kept seeing people that she knew that she got clean who went back on it and then passed away. So I think that emotionally drained her completely. You know, my family on that side was a little bit complicated. There's a lot of weird stuff. But I do wonder, you know, and I mean, I'm never going to get this answer because she's not here anymore, but I would always love to know is what changed from wanting to be sober, you know, wanting to be present with us like she was. What was it that made her stop? And, you know, when she drank the second time, I think there was a few occasions when, you know, as you do, you get a police health welfare check. We were a bit worried about your mum, so we turn up at her house. And, you know, at one point I turned up she's got a pint glass, so like a pint of Peroni glass, and in that glass is vodka, lemonade and tequila rosé. And at that point, I sort of realised, you know, there is no one that is drinking that concoction in a cup because they enjoy the taste. At that point, she's drinking that because she's trying to do something. And at that point, you know, I guess the guilt came back, and the point of, you know, this isn't a choice. You know, you don't choose to have that. You know, if you pick a drink, you have a drink that you like. Yeah. There's no way anyone likes that. And I could see it curdling, and it was just, you know, I think at that point, I was like, no, she's...
Yeah. And I think we've spoken about alcohol and the implications of addiction around it. And in no way would I ever say to someone, everyone should be teetotal, because I think you put the right boundaries in place, you have the right education, you have the right understanding that the same as everything in this life, in moderation, you know, the same as you'd say to someone, well, you're not going to sit and eat KFC every day or eat a bar of chocolate every day, you know, because within moderation, everything is okay for humans to experience, and it is part of that. But is about having boundaries like you've done to say, right, this is how I'm going to protect myself. And I think it's admirable now that you're doing the volunteering, because there is a lot of people that's lives have been affected, and yours could have gone completely the other way. And I've seen people's stories on LinkedIn where their life has been affected by addiction from their parents, which has caused them to have so much stuff, so much trauma, and they've turned to alcohol to cope as well. And it's taken years for them to find recovery. My question as well is, how did it affect your siblings? Did they have the same outlook on it as you? Did it drive them down the same sort of paths as you?
So with my siblings, there's obviously quite an age gap between us. So my oldest brother is 9 years older than me. So he was impacted quite more so, I would say, than me and my younger sister. But again, you know, because of the age gap between us, we had all one by one sort of like not done our bit, because that sounds awful to say, but he was with her at her very worst. So when she had the addiction, worst of all, and you know, my mum didn't just drink; she was doing drugs. You know, she was doing crack. So there's a lot more, and because he was older, he was a bit more aware of when she was at her worst. So I think he definitely went through more than what me and my sister did. I went through the phase about when we were sort of getting evicted, and then obviously I was quite a big support system for when she went through her recovery in the first instance. And then obviously my younger sister was more close to her when she went through that last period. Because by that point, myself and my brother had obviously come to the conclusion, you know, we've led the horse to water, they've drunk it, and they've decided to go back the other way now because they don't want any more. So I think it's impacted us all, and I think there's lots of stuff that we do in our lives that has impacted it. I think in terms of traits that we carry, because, you know, they say, and one of the reasons why I do love the work that NACOA do is because their whole purpose is around supporting the children to understand that it's not their fault that their mum drank, because I think there is a guilt that comes with it, and I think emotional sort of trauma, I think, is probably the right word, whereby it shapes how you deal with people going forward. Me personally, I was a closed book for a long time, used to keep everything to my chest. I wouldn't say didn't trust anyone, but I grew up so embarrassed of everything that I went through that I didn't want anyone to know. And I think that allowed me to do things like mask. You know, it's how I was able to still be the extrovert in the classroom, still be the big, bright, positive energy, because that to me meant that no one would have a clue about how upset I actually was at home, or how, you know, what I was actually thinking. Whereas my sister, she's a bit more emotionally, what's the word? Turmoil. So she's quite vocal, and when she goes through stuff, you know, everyone knows. Which I think is the comparison. And again, my brother is a bit more similar to me in terms of, you know, I wouldn't sit here and say all of us are fine, because we're probably not, but we've all got war wounds that probably complement and contradict each other in terms of the experiences and stuff that we've had over the years.
Well, for me, I think it's shown your resilience as a person, and I'm glad that you found your voice, because I think just listening to you will give lots of people that have gone through the same thing the chance to think, well, actually I could use my voice and give my side. So that resonation, that inspiration is amazing, and the fact that you're talking about it and giving back as well with the volunteering work, I think that's amazing, and I think it only benefits other people that are struggling right now. If you could say something to a 7-year-old Shaq back in the day, what would be your message to them right now?
Ooh, very good one. I think probably something along the lines of stay put and don't jump. And I know that sounds like a really silly thing to say, but I feel like, you know, that stillness to allow me to understand and to work out what was going on around me probably would have allowed me to deal with things a lot quicker, and to understand a bit more what was going on, so that I didn't, you know, jump, because what happened is I jumped and then I had to just keep jumping. I lost a lot of time, and a lot of sort of feelings by not just staying still and feeling it, which I think, you know, hasn't done me the world of good over the years. You know what, I found NACOA last year when I ran the London Marathon, and only now in the last year have I been able to have these sorts of conversations. That's something that's been bottled up for the last, you know, 14 odd years of my life.
Everything happens for a reason, right?
It does.
And there could be someone who listens to this and goes, do you know what? I didn't know about NACOA. I didn't know about that volunteering. I didn't know there was an organisation out there that could help me. And I've got all this trauma because my parents drank and I thought it was my fault. So again, everything happens for a reason. And I think the reason you found your voice is to inspire others that have lived this. And the last bit I want to touch on, you just mentioned you ran the marathon. And I know you use fitness as your coping strategy. So tell us a little bit about what you do now in terms of your fitness stuff, because I've seen it all on Instagram. So what sort of things do you do and why is it so good?
So, well, I started my fitness journey in 2023. So I signed up to a charity boxing fight, ironically, which was in my mum's memory. So again, very grateful for the experience because it allowed me to do it. I had a white collar fight for a charity called Favour, which is Faces and Voices of Recovery, based over in Scotland. And after that, obviously, as you do when you do boxing, I had my first charity fight, absolutely loved it, went again. Then I picked up running because to be a good boxer, you have to run. So then I picked up running, entered the London Marathon on a ballot, you know, thinking you wouldn't get in because nobody does. First year of entering, could only run 5k at the time, got into the London Marathon. Obviously, as I had a ballot place, found the charity NACOA, who I ran it for, raised about £1,300 for them, which was lovely. I am now an amateur boxer, so I've moved from white collar over to amateur, so I'm a licensed England boxing amateur boxer. I've now had 11 bouts. I also go to the gym at stupid o'clock in the morning, so 4 o'clock in the morning every day. So my usual week for me is I go to the gym 4 times a week at least, with 3 running sessions because I'm also running the Southampton Marathon in 2 weeks, and I box twice a week as well, with obviously sparring on the side. So I am always moving, as they say.
Yeah. And do you find that is a nice outlet for you now?
Yeah. Boxing in particular was amazing because it's controlled anger. And I think, you know, I had a lot of resentment and anger that built up through all sorts of things that have happened in your life. And, you know, it's very easy for us to have a bad day and want to take that bad day out on everybody. Mm-hmm. Boxing for me is so nice to be able to park it and not forget about it. Like they say that you know, in terms of, I think people should be able to feel and go through what they go through and, you know, channel anything that happens, whether it's anger, sadness, you know, happiness, whichever. So for me, it's nice to be able to put it on the back burner and to then be able to utilise it in a healthy space, which allows you to get your anger out, get fit. You know, I mean, boxing's amazing for your cardiovascular system. You know, I think my fitness age has gone from like 35 from when I was massively overweight until I'm 24, which is 5 years off my actual age. And, you know, I'm setting those sort of that role model experience for my son, who does think I'm the best thing since sliced bread, because I can go out and run the streets with him. I can go out on the scooter ride and race him, which I couldn't do 3 years ago. Yeah,
and I guess also you're being that parent that you didn't feel you had, in terms of your mum giving that role model for your son, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's nice to have. And, you know, I think I've never been an affectionate person. I've never been, you know, a lovey-dovey sort of person. But I think it's funny because my son is the most affectionate person I have ever encountered. And, you know, I ignore how I feel and, you know, to make sure that I am able to match that for him, because he is such a soft soul. And, you know, obviously it's done wonders for me because he has naturally made me a lot softer, which I think, again, has allowed me to keep in touch with, you know, what I need to do and how I can better myself and how I make sure I show up every day, not just for me, but for him too.
Yeah. And I think losing a parent in whatever the circumstances, it shapes you, because I think as a child, you never realise your parents are not going to be around. And I think when you lose a parent, you suddenly have this light bulb and go, well, life is short. You know, I've got to spend this time with the people that I love. I've got to be this person that they're going to go away and remember me for that. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah, I think for me, when I lost my mum, so I hadn't lost any family. So I had a friend who passed away a few years ago in sort of a freak accident. But other than that, I hadn't really had any sort of clashes with death per se. My granny died of her dementia in the December 2020. My mum then died in February 2021. And then my uncle, who also died because of addiction, and, you know, I hands down will say if my mum hadn't died, he wouldn't have died. Those two were thick as thieves. And then they died in April. And I think from then it gave you a complete shift that life really is too short, because I went from, you know, not knowing anyone really who had died in my close immediate family to losing 3 people within 6 months. And I think it really does just show you the importance of, you know, you can't wait for things to get better. You have to go after it.
Yeah. Again, we come back to only self can fix self. And when you're ready to do it, and I think sometimes it is those light bulb moments when you suddenly go, crap, the time is now. Because if I don't do it now, tomorrow's not promised for anyone. It's not guaranteed. And anyone that thinks that they've either not had that light bulb moment yet, and they will at some point, because life is inevitable that it leads to that point. But the time really is now, and tomorrow's not promised. But I honestly can say, after speaking to you today, you're an inspiration. And keep going with the fitness stuff. Everything you're doing in terms of coping strategies is everything that I would ever promote for people with the mental health issues. And I love the fact that people who have gone through this trauma, and myself included in this, our brains go at 100 miles an hour. I think that is something that happens. And some people will say, well, you do so much to avoid. And I'd say, no, I do that because my brain's rewired now, and I've got this thought pattern where I need to be doing stuff and progressing my life, because I've realised it's too short, and I've realised I've got a lot to give. And I can see that in you, and I know your story is going to resonate. Keep going with the work and spreading this education around this as well, because it needs to be heard. People need to be educated on addiction and what it can do to people's lives, not just the people that are addicted, the likes of yourself and your siblings that had to live that life too. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. If you enjoyed today's episode, please download and subscribe. And that is the end of another episode of Hello You. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being you. This was Hello You, where real conversations create real change. If today's episode moved you, challenged you, or simply made you feel seen, then share it, talk about it, and be part of the ripple. And remember, no matter where you are or what you're facing, you're never alone in this. We're building something together, and there's always room for you. I'm Dan Darwin, and until next time, be kind to your mind, be kind to yourself, and hello, you.